Hello and welcome back to Classical Conscience. My guest today is an amazing woman named Jeansun Lee. She has made a tremendous impact on me as a human being, as an artist, and I cannot wait for you to meet her. She's waiting for us on Zoom right now, so let's go say hello. All right, I am here with Jeansun Lee. Hi, Jeansun.
Hey, Sandy.
She's got a PhD in cell biology and immunology. She works for a biotech company called Vertex in Boston, and they specialize in cystic fibrosis drugs. So, Jeansun, do you mind telling us a little bit more about what you do there?
Sure. So I have an undergrad background in computer science, and as you said, for my graduate studies, I studied immunology and cell biology. So my role at the company right now is being the voice between the scientists and the engineers at the company. So we at the company, we have to build applications for data scientists to analyze their data. So I'm kind of in charge of making sure that's a seamless process. So I work with engineers, I work with scientists, and I help bridge the gap between the two.
Obviously, none of that has anything to do with music. But I've known you for like practically my whole life since we were kids, and I wanted to invite you to talk to me today because I know that classical music has affected your life. But I remember when we were really little that you weren't really a huge fan of classical music. So can you just go into like how that shifted in your mind and your heart?
Yeah, I think I started playing the cello when I was 10. I think that is the age where you kind of go to school, they ask you to pick an instrument, and that's kind of when you start playing whatever instrument that you choose. I chose the cello because my sister played the violin, and I was like, I'm not playing whatever she's playing. So I picked the cello. First, I thought it was really cool to kind of carry around. But then I felt almost like rebellious. It's like just because I'm like, I might have a natural flair for this, I don't want to do it. And I don't know if that was the rebellious side of me, or me just having so many other interests. Like I loved soccer, I loved my friends, I loved rollerblading, I loved all the pop music that was going on at the time. And by the time like I was 10 to like age 15, during like, those formative teenage years, I was like, I want to be myself. I was obsessed with bands, especially Collective Soul. And I used to collect all of their CDs. I still have it to this day, but I don't have a CD player anymore. I remember family members were telling me, well, you play the cello, you play it well, you love Collective Soul. Let's see if we can kind of combine that together. I remember playing some tunes along with some Collective Soul tracks. And that was really fun for me. And that was the time where I was kind of like, well, cello and classical music, they don't have to go hand in hand. I also briefly had a tutor for a couple of months or weeks, and he's a professional cellist, but he does a lot of like improvisation work, like jazz stuff, and he was teaching me a lot about that too. So for me, it was eye-opening to see that it's not just classical music. There's all sorts of genres that you can play with the cello. For me, and I think every kid can say this, even people who love playing their instruments daily, practice is it gets to you, like especially as a kid when your counterparts are out having fun and your parents are like, oh, practice. Well, not even just parents, like even like my teachers are like, try to get in like an hour a day. And my hours used to be like 10 minutes. Okay, I desperately need a glass of OJ. and then I would take another 10 minutes to get my OJ. And then I would practice again. And then I'd be like, oh, I need to pet my dog. So that was my mode of passing that hour. But then a significant event happened in my life, and I know not everyone can say this, but that was really kind of the turning point for me in terms of how my relationship with classical music grew. Now I feel bad for people who are like, oh, classical music. I'm like, that's for you. That's kind of my attitude now.
That's like a pretty drastic change. So I think it's really interesting how, you you went through this phase where you realized that playing an instrument was more than just, it wasn't simply a means to an end as far as like, oh, if I play an instrument, then I have to play classical music and I have to become a classical musician. It doesn't necessarily work that way. And it's really amazing that you found, enjoyment in your ability to use your talent on an instrument towards music that you particularly were passionate about at the time. And you mentioned, there was a significant event in your life that, really caused a drastic shift in your approach to classical music and how it affects your life today. Do you mind going into more about that?
So when I was 16, I remember we were on our annual summer trip to Korea, and I caught a virus called encephalitis, and it put me into a coma for about 3 months. People often ask, like, what's the first thing that you remember after you wake up from a coma? It's not like you fell asleep and you wake up and you're like, oh, there's my mom and dad. It's everything's just like really murky, and at least for me, that was my experience. And I actually don't remember like a good 8 to 10 months following that. So I remember when I did wake from a coma, well, I don't remember this, but I was told this. I got a lot of help from my family and their connections. And this is how I met my beloved late teacher, Mr. Emilianov. And although I had to basically start from scratch, everything from walking to basic arithmetic to, I had to see speech language pathologists to learn how to properly speak again and all of that. But they thought that music was such a big part of my life beforehand. And even though I would have to start from scratch, they felt that music is not only healing, therapeutic to listen to. And I think that goes universally. It's also, you're using your brain, and especially if you're a player, you're using your brain, you're using your hand-eye coordination, motor skills. Everyone was very supportive of the fact that that could be a very, helpful therapy for me. I do remember my feelings. For example, when I don't remember my lessons per se with my teacher, but I remember being super excited in the car driving to his house for a lesson. And I remember eating a bagel beforehand because that was our thing. We used to, my parents, we used to pick up a bagel and then we used to eat it in the car and then be like, oh, it's time for a lesson. So I just remember like that being just kind of like the one thing that I really looked forward to. And when you have an inspiring teacher, I feel that you want to do well, and you want to foster that relationship with that teacher. Mr. Emilianov was especially inspiring for me, and I wish I could remember those times, those such important initial lessons that got me so excited, because I was not excited about much else, to be honest. I was very discouraged. I wanted to return to school. I was not allowed to. My people that I thought once were my friends thought I had become, retarded and not can't be friends with me again. To have something to look forward to like that was very monumental in my desire to get better. That is kind of the segue into how classical music became such an integral part of my life, and it still is.
I remember being told that, none of us knew if you would ever make a full recovery. It was just something that, couldn't be guaranteed or even really predicted. And yet still you somehow managed to like go through a Juilliard pre-college audition and get in.
Well,
And you were, you were walking around the school going to classes. I mean, we didn't share any classes together because of
yeah, because of our age gap.
yeah,
Yeah.
but we would hang out, and I remember watching you grow over those couple of years that we shared together at that school. And it was really fascinating just to see how music inspired you, like both from a health perspective, but also just like it seemed like Mr. E and music brought your personality back. It was like bringing your spirit back into your body.
Pulling at the threads of my old self, and
Yeah.
and it was really kind of a fascinating process for me. I first the audition part, I remember preparing for it, and I remember the pieces that I played. um, those pieces will forever be etched in my heart as like
Wow.
kind of like a game changer, especially one of the pieces. It was the Bach Suite Number 3 Prelude, which is weird because it's not my favorite piece to play, but it doesn't sound terribly emotional to I would say the average person. And there's a lot more emotional pieces out there, but every passage of that piece, like I associate it with a part of my life, and I think that's the way that Mr. E was kind of like. I was telling him, I was like, I don't know, like, how am I going to memorize this? Like, my brain's not, they all there. Like, well, first, us musicians, we all have muscle memory going for us.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part is that he wanted me to take each segment, break it down, and then place each segment and tell a story with it. And it was very easy for me to do that, especially with what I've gone through. I auditioned. It was over. I don't even remember it being over. I just remember being excited to see Mr. E in the room.
That helps.
And then you know what? I said if I get in, great. If I don't get in, great. That was a great experience. I was a junior at the time, or a rising junior, so I would have 2 years at Juilliard. And I remember a couple of weeks later, Mr. Milyanov called me. He's like, "So, Jean-san, would you rather hear good news or bad news?" And I was like, "Well, good news, please. I've had a rough year." And he's like, "Well, good choice. You got into Juilliard." And I remember, calling you and, calling everybody, all my friends. Well, not my friends. I didn't really have much friends at the time. But my sister, and I told my parents, and everyone was so delighted. And the next 2 years, I swear to God, I say this, like with so much complete honesty. Like Saturday, my Juilliard days at Saturdays was the thing that got me through the week, as hard as the week was, being with my peers who ignored me. I was literally that person that was best friends with the teachers, and really didn't have much friends.
Join the club.
So, nerd high five. So it and not to say that if you go to Juilliard you have to major in music. I mean, it's a serious program and everyone's extremely talented, and it's almost intimidating at times because you have these like precocious 7-year-olds, like
Yeah.
posing these works of music and playing like like prodigies. And at that point in my life I was just kind of like, enjoy it. And I really, really did. And a big part of that was, the inspiration that I got from people around me and my teacher especially.
I would like to go back to what you said about the Bach cello suite, that you said has a lot of emotional meaning to you, even though you don't find the piece very emotional or even think of it as your favorite. But I think the fact that it has such an impact on you, from deep inside, that really says something. So let's listen to it together. And if you wouldn't mind just talking us through some of whatever you remember about those feelings you described or imagery that you concocted for yourself as you were playing the piece and what stuck with you, I think it would be really illuminating to hear about that while we're listening.
So this part from the beginning kind of is metaphorical of my fall, my downfall, falling down the stairs and just kind of lying there at the bottom, really hurt and not really sure what to do. And this passage here is just kind of figuring like what happened, what's going on with me, questioning myself. But this part is where I get really frustrated with myself because I'm realizing that I'm unable to do the things that I was once so good at. And I'm having these internal conflicts about kind of blaming myself, why can't I do these things, and just having a lot of internal struggles with coming into terms of who I've become. This beautiful part is where I'm coming at peace with myself and accepting that things in life happen and I need to roll with it, and how things progress, how my future shapes is totally dependent on me. And this is where I decided that I'm going to move forward and I'm going to make the best of the situation, and that is entirely on me. I love how that ends with the same how it started, because like I said, when it started, it was kind of like me falling down the stairs. It was really like falling down the stairs, lying at the bottom of the stairs, and just kind of like feeling broken and hopeless. So one thing that I was very sad about when I woke from a coma was so prior to that, I was the captain of my soccer team, and I was like a leader and all that. And then my first day back to school, I wanted to play soccer again, but the ball came my way. I completely missed and I fell on the ground because I lost my balance. I lost my timing, hand coordination. So that fall was just like a very like a metaphor about like how I felt about myself at the time. Like I can't do anything. But I love that it ends in that same downward scale, with a completely different attitude. It's like I fell down. I didn't fall down the stairs, but I walked down the stairs with like a really great attitude and a very good outlook towards life. And I think the whole piece is kind of like starting at the bottom, becoming self-aware of how, and allowing yourself to be sad about it, and saying, you know, cutting your losses and being like, that was me. hears, but there's so much other things out there. I think it's very helpful and therapeutic to process your feelings whenever you're going through something.
Absolutely. I think it's really amazing how vividly you remember those feelings that are represented for you by this piece. You talk about it like it was yesterday. And do you find that even today, after so many years, like obviously, you've not only made a full recovery, but you've succeeded in your life and you're thriving. Does this piece, or does rather not this piece, but the effect that this piece had on you, did it cause some sort of domino effect with other works of classical music and how you perceive them today? Like how does music, classical music specifically, affect your life now? And do you find yourself looking back to this particular piece in that moment?
Well, this piece was just kind of the segue to my I mean, I've listened to a lot of classical music, growing up in a house where my parents listened to a lot of classical music. But I've never felt the same about classical music until I went through this. Because you're producing it, I'm the one that's producing it. It becomes so much more personal. And then I realized that the importance of music in my life. And that not only inspired me to join an orchestra, but it inspired me to listen to more and more classical music. There's something about classical music, and not to downplay any other genres of music, but because I love all genres of music. I listen to everything. But there's, especially like, for example, like Brahms, I hear the torment and I feel it. And it's really raw and emotional, even though it's like 150 years old. So it was the domino effect in the sense that my appreciation for music grew, but I also became a lot more sensitive to everything that I was listening to when I listened to a piece. Classical music it's a community, I think, and I don't know what I'd do without it. I honestly don't. Like Monday nights when I have orchestra rehearsal, that's like the one thing that I look forward to like all week. It's
Wow.
a community. It really is. And I'm not even a professional musician, I do it as it's a hobby and I love it. And, I listen to classical music all the time, like in the car, like I'll be at a red light and someone will be blasting their rap music and I'll just crank up my Mahler, like, my music's better than yours. Yeah, so it's just a big part of my life. It's really hard to describe something that you love, I think.
Yeah.
And I think I think I'm I'm an emotional person, but I don't really show it that much. Especially towards like people I don't really know. But when music comes on, like I get like that those inhibitions kind of go away. So I could be at a party and listening to classical music and I'd just be like kind of like, oh my God, did you hear that part? Like, did you hear that part? And they'll be like, whatever.
So instead of giving you wine or vodka, we should just turn on some Brahms.
Oh, yeah. Turn on some Brahms. It will take it all out. Exactly. It's whatever you're feeling, there's classical music for it. I think people just who don't know it, haven't really discovered it yet. And people who say they don't like it, they just haven't really found something that, that touches them the way it did. Like, I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have that moment, that special moment, that pivotal moment with classical music myself. And I'm not saying you need to be in a coma to like experience this.
Right.
It could just be something, anything that's happening in your life. Like for example, like let's say you have a memory of, going to a carnival or something, and you remember these like feelings very vividly. Like you could find something that matches that.
Right.
But I honestly, classical music is. I just can't. It's hard. It's really difficult to articulate what it means to me.
Well, I mean, it's clearly it comes from some place that's very deep within, and I so appreciate that you took the time to discuss those feelings and your experiences, because I obviously, you know, from everyone who's been listening, it's a lot. It's a lot to swallow. You went through so much, but I think it's fascinating just to hear how, you know, classical music impacted your life in such a deep emotional way, and how you can have strong feelings for something even when it's not necessarily your favorite or the most emotional piece, just because it has some personal connection to you. I think that's really important and illuminating. So thank you so much for sharing with us and joining me.
It was really fun talking about it. It's let me just end by saying, like, the tables have really turned in my house. So when I was growing up, my parents would be playing classical music all the time, and I'd turn it off and like put on Z100 alternative rock music. And now, like, I'm blasting classical music at my house. I'm like, my dad's like turning down the volume. So things change.
Wow, that's great.
So thanks for having me, Sandy. This was a lot of fun, and I'm glad I got to share my story.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Bye.
Thank you everyone for being here today. As always, it is a pleasure to share music with you. Stay tuned to find out who will be joining me next time on Classical Conscience. On September 23rd, the versatile cello sensation Tina Guo will join me in a conversation about her exciting life as a performing artist and talk about her favorite cello concerto. Can't wait to see you then!